Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Smith. I'm with KPMG, and I've been there for about 7 years, and I am currently a project manager there, and I'm here today with my colleague, Brian.
Hi, everybody. I've been at KPMG for now almost 10 years, doing e-discovery for about 8 of them. But prior to that, I was in the investigations team at KPMG. Big umbrella, big company, can do a lot of different things. But yeah, the last 8 years have been really concentrating on e-discovery, and since KPMG has become a partner with Relativity, I've been trying to be a master at KPMG inside the Relativity space. So.
Yeah. And so what we're going to talk to you today about is an actual project that we had with a client, and we'll go into that, and there's our beautiful pictures there. So just kind of give you a quick rundown of the agenda. We're going to talk first about the scenario, so what actually happened and why we got involved, the challenge that we had with this particular project. We'll kind of walk through our approach and our review strategy as part of that approach, the solutions that we had, and then some lessons learned.
So this is supposed to be kind of like a use case about how we extended Relativity, but throughout the entire presentation, ask us questions, trying to get feedback from you guys, answer any more detail that you guys need about how we used Relativity in this particular case. So the scenario in the background is basically a company came to us and they had a very high up financial manager lose their unencrypted laptop. Obviously not very good from the company's standpoint. And they're obviously very worried about what kind of data, what kind of PII got out possibly into the world. So they came to KPMG and asked, what can we do about this? So luckily, we were able to work with the company, figure out their backup policy, and actually had a backup about a week before the laptop was stolen in the cloud, and we were able to bring that down. And that would be our data population that could have been lost. So what we needed to do was figure out a way to determine whose data, PII, inside this laptop was compromised. The client, very importantly, in California has very few days to respond and notify those people. So our goal was just to help the client find those people, who lost PII, any type of PII, and let the client notify them within a certain time frame. If they didn't, there would have been massive fines on behalf of the government.
Oops, went the wrong way. There we go. So really the challenge here was getting through a large amount of data in a short amount of time. First, we had about 122,000 documents, so not too bad. That thought we had maybe 2 weeks. Like, okay, great, we'll take our time. This isn't too bad. And then next day get a call. No, it's actually only a couple days, like a few days. Like, oh, okay, we need to kind of change our approach here. So really what the end goal, though, was to provide a report to the company of all of the individuals that were potentially compromised, along with what type of sensitive data may have been taken based on the documents that we found in this data set. The other big challenge was also ensuring consistency in the review, right? Make sure that all the reviewers were properly identifying the correct type of sensitive information that was found. So that was another big piece of that. We'll go in through all of this pretty much here. So really the approach we took, as Brian mentioned earlier, the first thing we did was take a copy basically of the backup, right? So what was basically taken. And then also use a combination of regular expressions and keyword searches to kind of figure out what type of PII did we have, like kind of the low-hanging fruit, right? So social security number, pattern matching, credit card pattern matching, to kind of figure out, okay, maybe we can prioritize these first to the reviewers, have them go through and just do a quick scan to make sure that there's nothing in there that's potentially damaging. Again, what we do with that data is batch it and categorize by data types. So we have like batches just for, this is potentially social security numbers. That's what you should be looking for when you're looking at this batch. This is potentially credit card numbers. This is potentially documents that have the word invoice on them, or this credit card name on them, or this person's name. So we kind of worked with the client to really figure out what type of information do you think could be potentially on here, and what kind of searches or regular expressions should we run to do that and properly identify and classify documents ahead of time, so that it makes it easier for the reviewers instead of just giving them everything and say, go at it and try to figure it out. So we did, oh, yeah.
Did you do any sort of high-level metric reporting to the client to help them with that process, with that feedback to you? Or did you just go them without having much of metrics and all that sort of stuff?
Okay, so basically you're asking what type of metrics did we provide to the client in that sense. So we'll go into like review, we did review statistics obviously, but as far as like metrics of what types of data we found, when we did find and we run the regular expressions and used pattern matching, we said, okay, these are potentially a large amount of credit card maybe information. This is potentially a lot of social security number information. So we did provide those metrics to them kind of before we started the review, so they had a good sense of what was going on. And you'll see as we go through and we look at one of the reports, a lot of it is going to be some false positives and a lot of clean documents, and we'll talk about kind of some lessons learned there.
And another thing I'll just add, we worked with the client ahead of time. This was a global employee. They traveled all around the world. They had European data. I mean, we weren't 100% sure. I mean, they don't have social security numbers. What are their identifying information over there to help us, write the regular expressions, identify those ahead of time. If we just did, credit card numbers 4444 and 2 or 324, we'd miss a lot of stuff that we'll talk about in a little bit.
So then we also just developed a coding panel, which sounds pretty simple, but I'll explain kind of how this became a key component later on in the reporting deliverable and how that worked in the review. We have a Q&A object, Q&A log. I think most of us are familiar with that. That helped a lot with us communicating with the teams and the review managers to kind of go, okay, what questions do people have? Because as Brian mentioned, we're dealing with a lot of global data. And so some of these, I think most of the reviewers are based in the US from what I remember. And a lot of them didn't have that experience. So oftentimes we did have to kind of go back and forth with the client and say, look, these are the kind of questions that we're getting. Let's talk through these before we kind of proceed on these types of documents. The other key component, which again is very integral and what we really leveraged Relativity for, was to build an application, which we call the biography tracker. And what that would be is as the reviewers would go through the documents, we would log certain pieces of information about them. So that way we can give that information to the client and say, look, we found this person's name and we found some of their contact information. And we'll explain how all that kind of fits in later on. And then, again, perform the managed review of the data, which is what we worked with our team on, and then normalizing the data and providing the final report to the client. So we'll pretty much go over kind of how we did a lot of this here.
All right. For the review strategy, we had a team of first level and second level reviewers. The interesting thing I mentioned, KPMG is a pretty big global firm. We didn't use contract attorneys. We didn't use outside counsel. What we used is our cyber and investigations team to actually review the documents. So we had teams on the West Coast, East Coast, to really pretty much do 24-hour coverage of review. We had a very tight deadline, 22 to 40,000 documents that had to be reviewed in days. We needed to have teams going continuously, project managers going continuously. And this wasn't your standard review. We had to look at every little detail. You can imagine Excel, how many different PII or names are in there. You're not just going to say responsive, not responsive, and go on to the next doc, so they take time. So we had, again, the 24/7. As Daniel mentioned, we've really batched out the type of documents, so that way a certain reviewer can really streamline onto those documents. Examples were social security number, account numbers, credit card numbers, terms like invoice, bill of lading, any of those kind of things that we could batch out consistently. One person can get familiar with those types of documents and then kind of roll through those as quickly as possible. It makes a lot of sense when one person's looking at an invoice and it's always going to have that account number in that same spot. They're familiar with those. Part of the managed team, any project we have with eDiscovery, we really try to leverage and teach the reviewers ahead of time so the mistakes are as few as far behind as we keep going. We provided reviewers with exemplar documents. These were we received from the client and also found some using some, searching whatever came back from our, analysis. And then we also provided a coding manual to show how to identify these docs. Again, these are good practices for any project when you're using Relativity, but getting ahead of what the reviewers need to learn instead of just trial by fire, always a good idea. And then we had daily calls with the reviewers to go over additional examples and QC the results. Again, 24/7, we split up the teams pretty much in two sets. Had a call at noon on one day, midnight on the other, depending on which review team you were. And, a very systematic way of the review with all the different batches and team calls and managed review and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So here's a very small snippet of the coding manual. So a lot of it had examples that we obviously can't share. But what we do is here's a simplified version of the coding panel. And then we also have all the different types of coding that would tell them this is what we need to do. So what happened as we were kind of going across some of these documents, you'd have really, again, the low-hanging fruit, the easy things, like write one invoice or one document that had one person's information or one person's W-2 or 1099. Like, okay, that's pretty simple. It's just one person. A reviewer can code that as reviewed and then mark what type of information has been taken and then, or potentially compromised, and then log all the biographical information in the biographical information object. When we had, one thing that happened though, as we kind of were going through the reviews, you started seeing spreadsheets with like lots of people's names and lots of people's credit card numbers, and we're like, oh, how are we going to have each reviewer log everybody's individual name? There's 100 people on this spreadsheet, and we don't want them to have to enter it one by one to the biographical tracker. So we'll kind of talk through how we went through that in a bit. Basically, that ended up going to the second level reviewers. So things that we were looking for, though, really were like date of birth, financial information. We had some health PHI information that we found, social security numbers, and then usernames and passwords were another big thing we found. People would, email or send a spreadsheet with all the usernames and passwords. So we'd have a lot of that going on as well. But this will become really crucial when we get to the final deliverable, the coding panel, and how this ties out. So we'll get to that too in a bit. So here's just a close-up of the coding panel, what it looked like. So trying to fit it all here on the screen. So reviewed clean, so there was nothing really that we found there. Reviewed one person, so one person's information, we tag it. Multiple people, unsure, technical issue would get funneled to the second level reviewers. And then what type of sensitive information. So then here's a snippet of the Q&A object and the entity tracker. So what was cool about the entity tracker that we built was pretty much we could have the reviewer either click link to first search for a person to see if they're already into the entity tracker, or we would just have them make a new entry. So a couple things with that we learned as we kind of went through the process. So we started seeing some similar names, and so reviewers would start entering multiple versions of the same name, and we'd have to kind of go back and like, oh wait, if you want to make sure you want to link and search through the entity tracker before you do that. So there's a lot of learning and lessons learned as we went through that, because it's the first time we've done something like this. Another thing we did too is worked with the company to identify, okay, who do we think potentially could be involved in this data set? And we would actually use Relativity to overlay that information into the back end of the entity tracker so that reviewers would know, oh, okay, I can just search for this person's name because I know there's someone at the company. And they would be able to just kind of link it instead of having to recreate, type the name, type the address that they found on an invoice or on a document, for example.
Just to go in a little bit more depth, everybody I think that's taken the RCA exam has seen a Q&A. Again, it comes in handy, especially with a review like this. I would also suggest, we typically do this on most of our matters, is extend the Q&A a little bit. It's great that there's all these questions and possible answers, but unless you're checking that 24/7, you might miss something. We always add email notifications through an event handler to say, hey, a new question is posed. The person that needs to answer the question can click the link and go directly there. And then once they do answer the question, a blast goes to all your reviewers, first and second level reviewers. So very quickly they know, is this PII? Yes, it is. Here's an example, and it can click that document right away. Again, just a good way to expand your typical, out of the box Q&A object from Relativity.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that too. So we actually gave them read-only access to the Q&A object as well, so that way they could see obviously what the answers were. And then on our daily calls twice a day, we would go over, hey, this is all here's some really good examples of documents that were brought up in the Q&A object this day, and let's kind of go through those on the call.
And here is the bread and butter of this project. It's the biographical information object that we created. Very simple RDO inside Relativity, but it carries a lot of weight. So first, our goal here was not to collect the PII. Our goal was to determine if PII was in these documents. So it's not like Brian Blush, his address is this, his date of birth is this, his social security number is that. That is not the goal in this entity tracker. We don't want to carry that PII any more spaces than the documents. Our goal was to get the information such as an address so that way he could be notified. So we went back and forth with the company a lot of time. For example, you find Brian Blush, that's me, inside a document, you're going to put that inside the entity tracker. If it's not already there, we're going to input it as a new entry, just like Daniel said, between the link and the new buttons. If it's new and you can find Brian Blush and it has its address in there, the reviewers were instructed to fill that information out. Why not get it while we're there? But that's only their address, their mailing address. And again, for the reason to send a letter and say, your information may have been compromised. If we didn't have that information, for example, you just saw a spreadsheet that says Brian Blush and my social security number, we'd work with the client to get that information and overlay that into the system to make sure it's a one-stop spot for all the data and all the information that's needed. One thing we talked about earlier is spreadsheets. This can be massive undertaking when you have hundreds of thousands of rows of people's names, social security numbers. If they're in, not just in our example, but anywhere that's in HR and they lose their laptop and you have all this information. No reviewer is going to go in there and just start linking there. Relativity is fast, but it's not that fast. You're going to be clicking and waiting for that button to come up and that little pop-up quite a lot. So what we'd use, and this is why you consult around this kind of stuff, is let's go through the back end. Let's format that spreadsheet, or let's look at those spreadsheets and make sure that we can just overlay that information into the RDO. Instead of just going to the documents table, we'll go to our biographical information table, and there we saved a ton of time. This is a very common practice, but in this case, pays dividends. I mean, I don't know how much time it would save if somebody just didn't understand or recognize to see this is a huge spreadsheet. Let's just stop and actually click that 2 or more buttons. That was one of the coding panels that we said. So you had clean, no PII, one person's PII, multiple people's PII. If it's one person, put it up there. If it's multiple people, let's try to figure this out a little easier and not have a reviewer spend a lot of time that costs a lot of money to fill out all that.
So here's just an example kind of one of the pieces of daily client reporting. It was just basically a breakdown. And so we were talking earlier about metrics, about what is it that we found today, and we give the client report every day. Here's what we found. So as you can see, this is I think the first or second day. A lot of it we found there was a lot of clean data in here. There actually wasn't too much of the sensitive information that we found.
Yep. Looks very familiar. Andrew from his presentation would be happy to use these dynamic little graphs that everybody does. The little what are they called? Wizards.
So then here's the review progress breakdown too. So we'd also give the client a burn down rate as we're going through the documents and as we're going through what's the review rate of documents that have been reviewed, what has been basically found as having or containing sensitive information as well. And then here's kind of a snippet of the reporting deliverable. So what we did with a combination of the coding panel and with the biographical entity tracker was basically marry the two. As we said, okay, we know now based on what we've done in Relativity, which documents had this type of sensitive information potentially taken, and we know now whose information that is based on the biographical tracker. So what we did is we were able to dump all that information out and do some scripting magic to kind of marry the two together into a final report. So basically the final deliverable to the client ended up being the names of people, any contact information we could have found for them, and then what types of sensitive data types were found in the documents reviewed for each of those individuals. That was probably the most painstaking part because as you could tell, or as you probably can imagine, some of it wasn't normalized, some of it we didn't have information for, so we're like, maybe we need to go back and see if we have any information we can get from them. So that was pretty much the deliverable and what they wanted, because basically they wanted to do a mail merge of all the people's information, a letter, here's their name, here's the type of information potentially taken, please contact us for more information. And that was pretty much the end goal there.
Lesson learned. Work with the client at the beginning. We talked about this, great question, but understanding their data, we talked about the national side or international side. I have no idea what the UK's banking numbers look like or their identifying information. If we didn't have that, we'd miss a lot of regular expressions that we could have used to batch these documents out. The next two on this slide are really around, hey, we did this, let's help this on other projects. This is not a one-time thing for us. This is a great footprint in Relativity that we can export the application, use it as a template, and do this a lot going forward. Now we have a plan in place, and this is actually something we're kind of going to market with our cyber teams. Hey, if you've had something, here's how we've done this in the past. A lot of clients found very appealing to them. pre-tag the documents that potentially contain sensitive information based on search hits. This is, again, what we talked about. When you're going through a review, it really helps if a reviewer says, hey, look for credit card information on this doc. Hey, look for credit card information and social security number on this doc. There's one in there somewhere based on our regular expressions. Have one other project team responsible for normalizing and cleanup. So this is really important. If you spelt Brian Blush with B-R-I-A-N and then Brian Blush B-R-Y-A-N, or for all the times in my email, Brain, B-R-A-I-N, they need to be normalized, because otherwise, if you don't constantly do that every day, we actually had a team member do this, at the end, it's just going to be a nightmare. How do you go about normalizing those without looking at row by row, trying to sort it? It'd be almost impossible to do, especially when you start getting into thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, and to add on to that really quick, so that was also really crucial with the biographical tracker, right? So once we were kind of going through every day, normalizing names, we'd update the tracker and let people know, like, hey, this is more information has been added to the tracker and names have been normalized. That way people weren't trying to re-enter Brain all the time, maybe going to Brian.
Yep. And triage to the troublesome documents, we talked about this quite a bit. Excels. If you think back to it, maybe we just take the Excels all out of it and give it to a reviewer that has the experience, for example, us, that very easily can be, find that PII in those large spreadsheets, manipulate it, and then overlay that into the back end, instead of having some reviewers waste time, says, man, this sucks, and go on to the next doc. Give reviewers a list of potential individuals, spreadsheet listing daily. So this is something that we thought up after the fact. If you had an almost up-to-date spreadsheet in Excel, it would be great to have it, if you have 2 monitors or something like that, here's your list of people that we have found thus far, here's your relativity. Again, we all mentioned that you kind of have to click that link or new button. Well, you can't click new unless you know it is a new employee. Otherwise, we're going to have a normalization problem we just talked about. So you have to go to link and then search. And again, relativity is awesomely fast, but you're still linking or pressing 5 buttons to get these pop-ups and then searching and stuff like that. What we thought about was, hey, let's just give this Excel. We dump it every couple hours automatically using some agents and back-end stuff that they could just email every 3 hours. Here's your current list. Search this. Control F a lot quicker than, hitting the link and searching, filtering, and whatnot. So great idea. We thought about that the next time we do it. Definitely going to be up there on our updates. And then leverage analytics. Again, analytics can be used in almost any case. We didn't in this project, but going forward, I mean, if you find invoices, maybe they don't all say invoice by search terms. We can group those together and say cluster and batch those out. I mean, they're a little different. They might say invoice. They might say whatever Spanish for invoice is, stuff like that that they could try to figure out and group together for, again, just speed of review. Pretty quick, but we're hoping, if you have any questions or discussion or, ideas that you guys have done similar to this, we'd love to hear them.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
What would have been your view if we didn't have a copy of that backup data that you started?
What if we didn't have a copy? Yeah, we'd be kind of out of luck. That was the one thing I guess that was really fortunate in this case, is we had a very recent copy of what was actually compromised. But honestly, I don't think you'd be able to really do anything like this if you didn't have a backup of the data itself. So that was a pretty big thing.
Obviously,
Yeah, unless it's already on the dark web, right?
obviously, yeah. I mean, it was a small company, very high up individual in that company, and I think as KPMG, our next conversation would be, let's get some records management and stuff going on in there and backup policies. So if this does happen, Yeah.
In this case, the data was isolated to just the laptop. They weren't concerned about other data outside of the laptop?
Correct. It was just isolated. Basically, the laptop was left somewhere, and I think it was the person's home, and it was unencrypted, and it was taken from their home. So pretty much all the data that they had on there was just the financial information.
Yeah.
As a matter of interest, did you take this and proactively run it against their other unencrypted laptops that they might have had lying around to see what other...
Oh, did we basically see if there was any other types of data on other unencrypted laptops that may have had some of this information?
They probably wouldn't want to have that data on there.
Sure.
Yeah, that was something we discussed with the client, and that was just not on their mindset, I think, at the time. But yeah, that was something we did think of, is like, well, what if you have this encrypted information on other sources of data across your company? So that was something that we made a recommendation to them, but that was pretty much it where it went.
Did you try OCR output for generate the text from the access sections?
The
Easier to write out?
OCR approach, is that what you said? Yes, we'd still OCR all the documents and everything, just like a normal workflow, to make sure we got all the text, so we didn't have any documents with no extractable text that we just like missed or something. That was something we definitely thoroughly went through.
As a suggestion, we didn't have a similar situation like this. We had to do a lot of normalizing data, and actually inside of SQL there's some really powerful data cleansing
Sure.
reporting. Did you use any of that as well, or was it all done manually?
Well, the things we were covering, names and addresses, besides zip code and maybe states, they're a little hard to normalize. I mean, last name, first name, we did 2 separate columns, so you have last name, first name. But 100% agree, if we were doing stuff like collecting the PII, the social security numbers, normalization, find the random ones that have 4 digits at the start instead of 3, those kind of things, and normalization through that, yes. But the stuff here, we just didn't think it would be as much value to pump it out and put it into SQL, just because they're so generic words, names, last name, first name, address, zip code, state. I mean, pretty simple on what we actually tried to collect in the tracker.
Well, you did your free call with regex. How much did that drop your 125,000 down to this year? And what was your review team side?
So between the regexes and the search terms, so for the invoice and terms like that, we're at about 25,000 docs. So good amount. Obviously, it's a hard drive. There's going to be a lot of junk on there. We can call down just from those kind of things. So yeah, about 25,000. And how long did we have to review?
We had literally, I think, six days to review.
Yeah. So, and again, it seems pretty reasonable until you try to get into these weeds and just it's not a responsive review. I mean, you got to look at every little sentence on that document.
Right.
Would you consider using Fact Manager to track your people?
That's a good point, and that was another lesson learned, I think, that we left off there. But yeah, that especially after seeing the demo today, I thought about our presentations like, oh wow, that would have been really powerful to have something like that, because that way you'd kind of have all that information again stored in there as well.
Or putting the names back into another index to do a dictionary search while you're
Absolutely.
using another Excel to find the person's name in your database?
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be a good one too.
Definitely.
Great idea. Fact Manager's come a long way. I mean, I remember trying it out when they first came out
Yeah.
and tried to stay away. Now it's, yeah.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering what were your considerations for whether or not to use analytics? And I was also wondering, did you have like large troves of PII and like spreadsheets or singular documents where you had to extract it out?
Yeah, so I would say the bulk of a lot of the like multiple person PII came from those spreadsheets, because again, they would have customer information and they just put all their financial information in a spreadsheet and be like, oh, okay. But yeah, analytics was something that was kind of an afterthought, unfortunately. That was something though that as we because we didn't kind of know what to expect, this was kind of like open range for us. We'd never done this type of matter before. But now after going through it, I think we're definitely going to utilize that for any future matters like this, because it could help you find, like, again, similar documents like the invoices or near duplicate documents, because we did have a lot of duplicates still, near dupes, I would say, in a lot of it as well.
Now, Andrew, as he said today, all you can eat. So,
That was another consideration, yeah, cost.
Yeah. So, another thing I was thinking about: what happens if they lose 10 computers? I mean, how does this scale? Now you're looking at 220,000 documents that manually have to be reviewed. At what point does it kind of say, all right, let's just notify every customer instead of paying for the review and stuff like that? So it's an interesting scale. We had 1 laptop, 6 days. If you have 10 laptops, or, as you get into more of the hacking stuff, it could be very big compromised. And we hear about that all the time. So, yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but how are you approaching the problem of someone's data being spread across multiple
Yes.
And then who was doing that? Was that being done live during the review? And I apologize if I missed that.
No, that's fine. So yeah, basically, whenever information, so then whenever the reviewer would code, they would code, what they found, and then also who was involved with that particular document. So using a combination of the tagging for those documents, and then also the linkage of the document ID to the actual person, we were able to kind of, at the end when we did the report, like marry the two, and then say, okay, this document's for this person, and it has this PII. So you did have multiple entries, right, with one person and different types of PII maybe going on, or maybe even the same, and we just had to normalize that at the end. Pretty much, yep.
And you also notice the entity tracker, that's obviously a record in a separate table that links to these docs, one to many, actually it could be many to many relationship, but we took the tag of sensitive information on that document, not on the individual.
Right.
So if Brian Blush had PII or Social Security number on this doc, we knew this particular doc had Social Security information, and it really benefited us if you check that once. Instead, if it had multiple people that had Social Security numbers, you check it once for Social Security number, link all the people, but you're not checking Social Security 20 times on that document for
Right.
that record. Then all of a sudden, you're just kind of becoming unwidely. So,
Yeah.
just again, a way to save time when you start, taking relativity and object to object or multi-object field and how they link.
Sorry, one more thought.
Sure.
If you treat an entity as a person and an address, what about when a person has potentially multiple addresses? We encountered that. Was that a separate entity or did we ever?
We did encounter that, and I believe, from what I remember, we did treat them as separate kind of entities there. Yeah. Just to be on the safe side, because there were people with a lot of common similar names, and we didn't want to make an assumption, so we did provide that as a separate entity.
Yeah, and it's good. I mean, the mail's going to be sent 2 places. So,
Yeah, there's different notification requirements depending on state, so it's a
Right.
little bit complicated unless you break this up.
sure. Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll give you back, 20 minutes every day. Really appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you.